So Matt Iglesias of Vox went on Chris Hayes' show on MSNBC, and he's going to try to make the case here that Biden is going to be the most progressive president in modern American history. Yes. So he's going to try to make that argument. I want to play a little snippet from it, and then we'll discuss.
This pandemic has completely altered the presidential race, fair to say, from the coverage of the primary to when and how it actually ended. It's also exposed Donald Trump for his weaknesses, which were already quite apparent before, but even sharper relief now. And that's why his polling average and the Real Clear Politics average is at its worst position in a while. After this very long, hotly contested Democratic primary, there's now a tremendous amount of unity on the Democratic side, I think it's fair to say. Joe Biden's campaign is creating joint policy task forces with Bernie Sanders people. And as Matt Iglesias writes in Vox, though Biden did not run an aggressively ideological primary campaign, the substance of his proposed agenda on everything from housing to education to minimum wage to climate change is, quote, arguably the most progressive policy platform of any Democratic nominee in history. Joining me now, the author of that piece, Matt Iglesias, senior correspondent at Vox. Matt, I like the piece. You had been one of the Vox people who had sort of made the case for Sanders early in the primary when different authors were doing that. Your piece here is sort of on the substance of just what's in the platform. Why do you say that it is possibly the most progressive agenda of a Democratic nominee that has happened so far?
You know, Joe Biden is a Democratic Party lifer. He's a very mainstream Democrat. He's been there for a lot of years. A lot of that sort of old history came up during the primary. But the evolution of the Democratic Party has been in a much more progressive direction over the past 5, 10, 20 years. And I think that's really reflected in this platform here. I mean, a small thing is Biden is for the $15 an hour minimum wage, right? We didn't talk about that a lot during the primary because the candidates all agreed. But as recently as 2016, that was a very divisive issue. That was something Hillary and Bernie Sanders argued about an enormous amount. And now it's like you didn't hear it because it's the consensus. But it's the consensus that actually drives what might happen in policy terms. And so you look at down the road, you know, he's talking about doubling Pell Grants, tripling housing assistance, big increases in federal funding for low-income schools, as well as this really actually quite ambitious climate policy agenda. And it's not that Joe Biden is the most hardcore leftist, but it's the party as a whole is a much more sort of uniformly progressive force than it was just even a few years ago.
I remember seeing an illustration once of where he was in the sort of ranking of Democratic senators. There's a DW nominated as the sort of political science score, and he's like always right in the middle of the Democratic caucus throughout his career, which is a kind of impressive achievement in its own way, right? It means you like understand exactly where the kind of middle consensus position is.
Is that impressive, Chris? Being in the middle of the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C., and that represents like what the consensus position is? I would contend being in the middle of the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. means you're a right-winger. That's what I would contend. Because the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. is wildly out of lockstep with the American people. In some ways, Republican voters are more progressive than Democratic politicians in Washington, D.C. For example, 52% of Republican voters support Medicare for all. Over 80% of Democratic voters support Medicare for all. Biden doesn't support Medicare for all, so being in the middle of the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. is no accomplishment, is no achievement, and it doesn't represent some sort of, ideological position that is wildly popular and consensus building. No, because both parties in D.C. are hooked on corporate money and are doing the bidding of those corporations. So if you find yourself smack dab in the middle of either party, chances are you're doing the bidding of multinational corporations and Wall Street and the military-industrial complex, so on and so forth. So I'm stunned that these guys are trying to make this case. Now, to the broader point that Matt Iglesias was making, like, hey man, if you look at the platform, this party is more progressive than, probably the most progressive in modern history. Probably the most progressive ever, if you look at the platform and what they're advocating for. To which I respond, we heard the same song and dance in 2016. And then what happened? Hillary went on to campaign and try to pivot to the right of Trump on many issues, try to, they think that it's so clever and it's so savvy to run to the right in a general. But that's just lying. When you say I have these left-wing views in the primary and then you say I have these right-wing views in the general on the same issues, you're just lying. That's what you're doing. It's not savvy, it's not clever, it's not high-minded politics, it's not intellectual. It's now nobody knows what the hell you believe because you said you believed a left-wing thing and now you say you believe a right-wing thing. So, listen, I said this before and I'll say it again. The platform is useless. The task forces are useless. That in no way, shape, or form will that show how Biden will govern. Now, you could say, well, Kyle, come on, man, you're speculating just as much as they're speculating. They're saying the platform matters. You're saying it doesn't matter. You're both speculating because nothing has happened yet. So, how can you make that claim, Kyle? Well, the answer is very simple. He has a track record of over 40 years. We know exactly how he governed. We know exactly how he voted when in Washington, D.C., and we know exactly how he'll govern based off that as president. So I've gone through it before. He supported NAFTA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Iraq War, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which repealed Glass-Steagall, which gave us the crash in 2008 and 2009. Certainly pushed us in that direction. The Patriot Act. He supported the Patriot Act. He supported the Wall Street bailout. He does big money fundraising all the time. He says he'd veto Medicare for all. He's against free college. He says he'll means test it. So really the only issue where he even bothers to sound progressive is the living wage. He says, I'm for a $15 minimum wage. But ready? I hope you're sitting for this one. I don't believe him. Why? Because he didn't do anything about it in the 8 years he was vice president. Obama didn't do anything about that. He didn't do anything about that. And he just recently came to it, and from pressure from Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders threw a softball down the center of the plate for him when they were having their sad little get-together where Bernie was endorsing him. And Bernie's like, Joe, do you support a living wage? Like, oh, yes, Bernie, I absolutely very much support that. That's the only time I've ever heard him bring it up, guys. That's it. So what? He brings it up a handful of times and just recently, and you're like, oh, yeah, no, I totally believe him. He ain't going to do that as president. Now, if he wins and if he does that and I'm wrong, I'll come out here and say, I was wrong, guys. Biden did the $15 minimum wage. But what I'm going with is the preponderance of the evidence as to how he'll govern. Guys, he's going to be a neoliberal corporatist. They could do all the window dressing they want and all the placating of the left that they want with the platform and with the task forces. We know how he's going to govern. He's going to be a neoliberal corporatist. I wish I was wrong. I wish the platform mattered. I wish the task forces mattered. But they're not going to matter because you know what? On top of his record, his political identity is in part based on the things he's been saying I'm not for. Okay? And that's a super important point. He's repeatedly talked about vetoing Medicare for all, which is probably the key litmus test for whether or not you're really on the left. He's repeatedly said, I'm not for free college. I'm going to do a means testing thing that over $125,000. He's not going to eliminate all student loan debt. I can go on and on, man. He's not going to do these things. So, honestly, I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it. The fact that you just look at the platform as if it's like a one-to-one relationship, like, whatever it says there, that's what he's going to do. You're kind of a sucker. Or you're duping us on purpose. You know he's not going to do that, but you still want people to vote for him, so you're pretending he's going to do the things in the platform or the things on the task forces. That's a sucker position, man. He's not going to do it. I hope he does. I wish he does act more on the left, but you have to go into these things eyes wide open. You can't delude yourself about this stuff. Own it. Own it. Like I said, I have a hell of a lot more respect. Like, I respect an honest argument for Biden. And I've seen him. I think like Michael Brooks recently, I saw him make some sort of harm reduction argument. I got zero bones to pick with Michael Brooks on that. I think there's a perfectly reasonable harm reduction argument to make. But the key point here is he's not lying to himself and he's not lying to you. He's making a pro-Biden, bare bones harm reduction argument. I got no problem with that because it's honest. It's honest. It's not honest to think he's going to do the platform or listen to the task forces. He ain't going to do that. So Get rid of that shitty argument. Make a better argument for him, and then I won't have to do these segments mocking you and calling you a sucker, okay? Because that's what Chris Hayes is. That's what Matt Iglesias is. Biden's not going to do that stuff. You know, I would love it if Biden won and I was wrong and he did all those things. I'd love it. But that ain't going to happen. And I hate to burst everybody's bubble. At least be honest when you make your pro-Biden arguments. That's the least I can ask for.